The Pastor's Heart and Dominic Steele, and today we're talking about creating a dual audience church, how to do church live and well, both simultaneously for the in-the-room audience and for the online audience. A couple of weeks ago, I gave an address to the EFAC group, the Evangelical Fellowship in the Anglican Communion, and argued that we shouldn't be leading for recovery, but rather for endurance. I mean, if we didn't think this whole online season was going to be over quickly, and that the virus and health risks were going to go away quickly, well, we would be leading for recovery, but they're actually going to go up and down, the virus levels in the community, the anxiety levels in the community, and perhaps what we have now is going to be the description of life for the medium, even maybe long term. Well, Karl Fasse, Simon Hunter and Jodie McNeil are our guests. Jodie pastors Jamboree Anglican Church, south of Sydney. Karl, of course, very well known. He's the creator of Jesus the Game Changer and has so much TV and broadcast experience. Former senior pastor of Gymea Baptist Church here in Sydney. And Simon, director of Waterloo Studios in Sydney, a writer, producer and director, and has worked closely with Karl on his various film projects. I've got questions about strategy and execution to ask them, but first a little word about supporting the Pastor's Heart. We're not quite there in terms of funding, and we want to better serve pastors across the world. There's a growing audience of evangelical leaders in England, America, across Africa, New Zealand, but also here in Australia. And if you were able to help us out by becoming a supporter at patreon.com/thepastorsheart, we would really appreciate that. Now, let me start with this thesis. It's not about recovery, but endurance, and that we need to be leading the ministry, not for recovery, but endurance. I wonder if we could start with you, Jodie. Agree, disagree, implications?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think there was a time when I was getting together with my church and we're saying, about 8 weeks, hopefully, and then we're going to have a huge big barbecue and we're going to get all of us together and have a huge celebration. And then it's 10 people. And then it's 20 people, and now we can have 34 people and a dog, and it's sort of so it really is that sense that it's not going to be quick. Mm-hmm. And every message we're getting from anybody who's in leadership is this is the long haul.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Carl?
Yeah, well, every time you think that it's improving, it gets worse again. And look, I think in Australia the psychological blow was Victoria, and that's made every premier leader that thought we were moving towards space where we could open it up has pulled their heads in, basically, and now everybody's very nervous, and probably rightfully so. And so it looks like it will be a long haul.
Simon?
Yeah, I think everyone's used to change now very quickly, and I think that how it's going to play out is a very interesting scenario. They did say it was only going to be 15 days, and I think we're at 150 something now. So the situation is, I think everyone's just going to have to get used to change that's constantly happening over a very long time.
And if the virus levels are going to go up and down in the community, the anxiety levels up and down in the community, we should be expecting our attendance physically to go up and down in church, and hence people swapping back and forward between the online audience and the physical audience. What implications has that got for us as leaders of churches? We'll start with you, Karl. Yeah.
Look, I think it's an interesting time at the moment because what are we in New South Wales? 8 to 10 weeks that we've been under this situation in New South Wales. And several weeks ago, you and I have chatted, Dominic, about when you opened up, and there are numbers of churches that went down that route and are doing either the live or the simultaneous or opening up for people. And I actually spoke physically at a church a few weeks ago.
And you told me it was so good to be back live.
It was fantastic. It was great. I mean, and it's a great experience. But the interesting thing is that there's lots and lots of excuses if you don't want to get live again. And there's kind
both for the personal and for the church leadership.
Absolutely. And yet, there's a lot of opportunity to be open live again. And there's people that would really, really appreciate it. And that's where I think the dual approach that you're taking and numbers of other churches are taking is a very good approach, because it's actually, it can flex around what you do size-wise, but you've got both of those modes open for people who just simply don't get out, don't see many people, would just love that human touch, if you get that sense of not touching, but the human interaction, which is very important.
I mean, one of the things that's really surprised us is we just started Monday night last week our first Introducing God course post-COVID, and we had 25 guests, physical guests, which is a record number for us for our Term 3 course, you know. And as people who've checked us out online during COVID, then kicked the tyres a little bit physically the last month or so in church physically, and now have made it to the evangelism course. Yeah. Well, that's just extraordinary.
Well, it's helpful to recognise, Dominic, that that's not an accident, and that's not just not an outcome of COVID. There's an impact there, but it's also an outcome of the work that you've done. And so I think there's a balance there about doing the work, about doing the hard yards. Don't just choose the easy option.
We had a conversation about this yesterday, Jodie, and we were talking about many of us were doing online fellowship well during the height of COVID. Then as we switched back to live services, we kind of abandoned all of that. Do you want to pick up on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we were using a Zoom chat for our morning tea and for our dinner after church. And it was quite fun because we'd have different people who would set up their iPads at their family dinner table, and we'd sort of look around. I just led church, and I was starving, and I'd say, so what are you eating? Oh, we've got lamb roast. It's like, really? And so we had a bit of a joke that way. And but as soon as we were allowed to start to have a number of people along, 10 or 20 or something like that, they sort of dropped off. We had our meals afterwards, like real meals, socially distanced, but we didn't think, let's keep doing the Zoom chats afterwards. And I think it's true that there are some people who just haven't felt safe to come back here, and they've probably
been ditched in terms of community. So. Yeah, and we've got to work out as we think long haul how to do both of those at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah. Karl, you did at the start of COVID some very helpful presentations on preaching to a camera, communicating to a camera.
Oh, good.
And lots of us learnt lots from you at that point. But I wonder if you could now help us think, how do I preach to a group in the room in front of me and knowing then there's another audience online as well? Help me there.
A couple of things I'd say. I wanted to make a point, and then, you know, Simon, as the director of the shows that we have been working on, you know, would be watching carefully what I would do when we're filming a show. And one of the things I wanted to say, which relates to this question, is when you create a series like Jesus the Game Changer, what you do live in a church service is almost diametrically opposite to what we want to achieve in Jesus the Game Changer. It's a very interesting thought. Jesus the Game Changer, you want it to be timeless. You want it, you know, if somebody watches this in 5 years' time, it still works. So you don't use dates, or you are vague with dates so they work in the future. You don't use in-house language. You want it to be as inclusive as possible. You know, that's the sort of thing that you're doing. You're trying to engage the audience one-on-one in something that you could be watching this anywhere, anytime, and you would get it. My thing is that, you know, the writer of the Hebrews said, don't give up meeting together as some in the habit of doing, which is going back to Simon's point. It's not just about preaching a sermon and playing a couple of songs. It's meeting together. So what does that look like? So you want it to be time referenced. You want it to be this week. You want it to people to know the people involved. You actually want people to go, this is my group. This is my people. You actually want it to be in-house, which is odd, you know, because it's almost diametrically opposite to what you would normally do. And I think, you know, there are sometimes I've watched people doing things, you know, when they've recorded their service, and they could be shown to anybody at any time, anywhere in the world. And I think there's a bit of a subset of people that think, oh, we've got people from Ohio, you know, we've now got a global audience. Well, that's nice if they log on, but then you're not there for them. You're there for meeting together as the people of God. So what does that mean? So if you're then doing that live, it actually gives you permission. I said in that video, one of the things the point I make in the video is that if you're talking to a camera, understand that you're listening to this. The person listening to this is one person on their lounge room. So it's a one-on-one conversation. It's not you're not preaching to 100 people. You're, in a sense, you're talking to one person. So the last time I noticed sitting in a cafe talking to one person, I didn't tend to yell at them. I didn't kind of over gesticulate.
But last Sunday in church, there are actually 100 people in the room.
And that's the point I wanted to make. That those people in the room give you permission.
Right.
Because the person at home recognises that it's almost like a shift in their head. They're now one of a group. So that gives you the opportunity to be more animated, to be louder, to look around the room, because the person at home sees all the people. There's a sort of mental shift. Okay, we're a crowd, so I can watch this as a crowd. But the thing you've got to keep in mind is that camera represents the other 100 people. So you've got to remember to engage the camera. Because often what you'll do is ignore the camera and talk to all the people you know, but you've got to engage the camera regularly.
Let's come to you, Simon. You were talking to me about the fourth wall here. What does that term mean? And talk to me about engaging the camera and that kind of thing.
Well, firstly, the fourth wall basically means if you ever see a film and somebody looks in the camera and talks directly to the audience, that's called breaking the fourth wall. And effectively, that's what happens with pastors, is a lot of times they will look directly at the camera and address the person watching. But one of the things when you're, I think, filming something like a church service, they should be treating the camera as another person in the actual service, not the person in the service. And so if they were to look around, talk to somebody over here, talk to somebody over there, and then have their direction at the lens as they would when they're normally preaching, it just gives the person watching certainly the feeling that they're actually part of a service. It's not just directed exclusively at them. And I think one of the things that happens when it's exclusively at them, it becomes a little bit manufactured as opposed to being organic, because that never happens when you go to church. And if it does, it kind of feels a little strange. So I think when pastors are talking, consider that, if they're recording it at their church, it's going to be more natural. But if they're pre-recording it, maybe there's an element to look around as if you are staging it on up on the stage or in the altar, that you are looking at a number of different people. The other thing I want to offer too is what this technology actually gives is the opportunity for the pastor to actually be a person. And one of the things that we worked really hard on Game Changer was that through Karl's wonderful interviews, we actually interviewed people for the content, but we actually got a capture of their personality. And sometimes what you can do is have somebody interview the pastor almost, and you don't have to see who's asking questions, but you can actually almost do an interview of the pastor so that they can give an aspect of themselves as an additional thing to the service that they may not have done in the past.
It's interesting, one of the changes we noticed at the beginning of COVID was that we'd had, for a long time, we've had question time in church where people have put up their hands, and we might get 3 or 5 questions a week. But basically, since COVID started, we had people typing in questions on the villagechurch.sydney/Sunday page, and the number of questions has radically increased when you're typing them in rather than putting up your hand. And so we've had far more questions all through COVID. And as we come back to meeting in the room, we've wanted to include the online audience and the physical audience, so we've stayed with asking questions that way. And but that means somebody pops up and has that physical that two-way conversation at the end of the meeting that you're talking about there, Simon. Yeah. Have you had a similar experience, Jodie? You're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because we basically just kept doing church all year, and at one stage there were 3 people in the room pressing buttons, and then there were 3 plus 10, and then 20, and so on. So suddenly there were people, and I was sort of for quite a while looking directly at the camera, and then I was starting to do a bit more of the switch from side to side. But I've kept addressing the camera from time to time.
And do you find it at particular key moments you'll choose to look down the barrel of the camera?
Absolutely, absolutely. So on this last weekend, I would address people and I'd say, you might be here in the church with us, or you might be there in Facebook Live. So welcome to you. And so address them right down the barrel, but then leave them where they are and then have them as just one of the crowd as I'm sort of switching from side to side.
Now, what would you say if you were directing Jodie's church service, Simon?
That's a tough question. Look, it's the main thing is when you turn a camera on, people just change. They just do, and I think it's trying to remain authentic as if it was your church service on a Sunday. That's the most important thing. It might mean that you have to do it a number of times and just record it, watch it back, until you just become comfortable in standing in front of the camera. And Karl's certainly an expert on this, but being in front of that camera and feeling incredibly comfortable is really a talent in itself, but it's also something that you can just practice.
I mean, I would say just on that with Simon that the hardest thing, and you would have done this now, Jodie, this year, is watching yourself back. I mean, the first time I ever did a show at Channel 7, it was years ago. They asked me to host a Christian Television Australia show, or New South Wales Association show, and I did 2 programs in the morning, and I was at lunch, and we were going to do 2 in the afternoon. I thought, maybe I should just go downstairs and watch how it went. I shouldn't have done that. It was so depressing. You're like, oh gosh, that's terrible. And it takes you a while. As Simon's absolutely right. It takes you a while just to be natural, And the funny thing is. Correct me if I'm wrong, Simon, but being natural and authentic is actually faking it a bit, because there are certain things that you do. For instance, always smile when you come on, because if you don't smile, you look like you're at a funeral, like you look terrible. And so there's just some bunches of things like that about how much you use your arms. You'll actually pick up that there are certain words that you'll say or things that you'll do that are just incredibly annoying. Until you watch it back, you kind of go, I really should stop saying that, or I really should stop doing that. So it's that thing.
How does the structure of the service change when you've got the audience in the room plus the audience online? Yeah.
Oh, well, I think that I'm trying to make church as normal as possible, so that people in the room are actually experiencing church as normal, and people at home are also experiencing it as normal.
Let me push back then. Lots of churches, 3 songs at the beginning because they know people aren't going to turn up on time. Yes. And so that first 12 minutes is kind of wasted real estate. Whereas actually the first 12 minutes of the online service is the most important 12 minutes of the online service. It does change. It can't be done normally.
Yeah. So we are now starting with 1 song, and instead of having a countdown, we are, the first thing people do will say, hello, welcome to church. We're now going to have our first song, which leads them straight in. Mm-hmm. And one really interesting thing that we did is, as soon as we had people back into the room, we said we're going to drop our kids' song, because we're not allowed to have public singing, so we don't want to have a whole lot of excitement and everything. Mm-hmm. And we realised we'd made a mistake. And so now we've brought our kids' song back in, and now it's a chance of people saying, I say, you can't sing, but you can do the actions. And it brought that life back in.
Really? I mean, that kind of sends shivers up my spine, Jodie. I just don't like cool adults having to behave like a dork, but maybe your personality, you can get away with it.
Jodie, he's in the village church.
I'll just defer to Simon. How do you think church structure should change based on working for an audience online versus an audience in the room, Simon?
I think the thing you have to remember, it's a difference between theatre and film. When people walk out of a movie, no one really cares, but when people walk out of a theatre, there's a sense of guilt that happens after the play started. And I think it's the same in church, is that people can come to church, and if they're 10 minutes in and they get up and walk out, there's a lot of eyes on them. I think what happens with what we're doing is people can tune in, they might see singing happening, worship happening for a period, and they might log out. Really what I think, if you take out of the rule book of making television shows or movies, is that you want to give them a reason to stay, because the worship is important, but it's different when it's being broadcast. So maybe what the pastor would consider doing is standing at or asking a question at the start of the service. So how is Jesus affecting you in your life? We're going to discuss that today. Then they can go on with their service as they normally would. But it's just essentially having what we call in television a teaser, is something that gives people a reason to say, you know what, I want to hear what the answer to that is, or more importantly, what the discussion of that is, or the exploration. And I think by considering that when they're starting a service that's going to be broadcast, it gives the audience a reason to stay and hear what those discussions are about.
And we might, as pastors, be used to doing teasers for come back next week for church, but we're not so used to doing coming up in 20 minutes in
Stay
church.
tuned, sort of.
Yeah. Well, that's really it, isn't it? Whereas
Yeah.
you don't need to stay tuned for those who are in the room because it's unlikely that they're going to leave.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point from Simon. You know, the pressure to not leave the room is enormous, especially if people know you. You know, if you get up and walk out in the middle of a service in your church, Jodie, it's like Jodie's on the phone at the end of the service saying what was wrong.
Did I offend you?
Yeah, that's right. But people are doing that at home all the time. Don't be offended. But nobody knows. That's a great point, Simon. And so the idea of creating the hook early in the service to keep people. My comment on that, Dominic, is that I think it changes length of time. You in a live audience with a live group of people, in a regular church service, you can kind of probably run it to an hour and a half, and you know, people won't really notice. Sermons can run out to 40 minutes. I just think you've got to tighten that all up.
Yeah.
That's my feel.
I found, having come back live a couple of weeks ago, my sermons had crept a bit longer, and I was on here last Sunday, and I thought it was totally fine in terms of length for those in the room, but it had crept too long for those watching on the stream. And so then the question is, well, how valuable are the two different audiences? And
Oh, I mean, clearly they're both valuable, and I think it's some of those things. I remember, a well-known pastor talking about the fact that he couldn't preach unless he preached for an hour, and I remember listening to a couple of these sermons, and I'm thinking, I could genuinely listen to it and go, you could do that in 20 minutes. You could genuinely get the point across you were making in 20 minutes. And I think online that's what we have to get better at. We just need to tighten it up so it's you kind of engage people and they stay with you in the process.
Now, if we're talking arguing for something that's going to be economically viable, I don't think long term it's economically viable to be doing pre-recorded sermon on Thursday and then doing something live on Sunday. I just think that's not sustainable. Comments? Maybe you first, Jodie.
Yeah, Jodie.
I spent a whole lot of time during ISO setting up our church as a studio and put all that energy into there, but it's actually paid off because now I turn up to church a little bit early and make sure the cameras are turned on and just do church. And that means that I'm back into the routine that, we really never left.
So you're just doing it live?
Just doing it totally live. And from an economic point of view, it's just normal church. It's the normal routine. And I don't have to add anything into my week as well as that.
Whereas I'm watching some guys and thinking, if it's binary, they're either live or recorded, then it's a big jump to move to, what are the different scales of video options for people? If we've got people who are with us who are thinking, well, look, I've been doing my recorded thing just on my iPhone or whatever, and I've worked out how to do that, but now you're pushing me to go live. How do I even begin?
Well, I mean, I'll default to Jodie on this because, now I don't run a church, so I'm one of those wonderful people that can give an opinion but don't have to do it. And the other thing too is every time I do a show, I work with Simon and a couple of other guys, and we have multiple
You're at the
cameras.
high end of the directing.
I'm just trying to be coherent. Simon tells me what I'm not, so my job's pretty. So I'm not, but I do think, do you do two cameras or one?
We do three.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, my only comment, and Simon would be much better on this, is it is good to have a couple. Something that's a bit close up and something that's a bit of a wide. If you can work that out, that's best.
Yeah.
We're running 6.
Okay.
Now you're just showing off.
But we've worked out at the back of the room a tight shot and a wide shot on the main platform. Then we want a really wide shot of the whole room. And actually, I wanted to do that in order to make the people, we've got some people who are immunocompromised, some people in high risk groups, some people who aren't going to be coming back for a long time. We've got other people who've come back already, and then we've got a group in the middle who could come back. I want them to see that this is a viable community of people interacting, and I want them to see some of their friends. I want them to see the backs of their heads so that they think, they're back. I could go and be part of that, And so I do want a big, wide positioning shot. Now, one of the problems is with a big, wide positioning shot is actually there's nobody there at 9:30 because they're still behaving like turning up late.
And look, but the tension on that, and Simon should comment on this, the tension on that is who's choosing what cameras on when.
Yeah.
And that's actually a fairly developed art form.
Then we've got one on the drums, one on the keys, and I don't know what the last one's doing, something.
A drone or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
Well, actually, so I heard you say the other day, Simon, you didn't want crane shots in church. Why was that? Not that we have the budget for that. But
Look, I'm open to a lot of anything, but it depends on what you actually want the audience to feel. And if you want them to feel they're at a rock concert, get a crane in there and take it across the tops of heads, because that's exactly what rock concerts do. If I can just add something, we all, I think, sitting on the show have the luxury of knowing how film actually works, and unfortunately for a lot of pastors, it's just not an area that they're used to, and with all respect, they've never done in the level that we're actually talking about. Just having one camera or an iPhone. I mean, I learned a lot of my directing skills from my father, who was absolutely awful with Super 8 movies from our holidays. And you'd watch them and you think, this just doesn't look right. And my dad was proud of him, but a lot of people don't understand the aesthetics of a shot, how it's framed, what's in the shot, what that shot does, whether it's a close-up or a wide. And those kind of skills take a little while to learn. We're working on a project where we're working with churches all across the country where we can start teaching them how to do that, but also that they may not have the budgets to go out and get 3 cameras and a mixer and a camera crane or anything like that. They may be a very small church. They might have 30 people who coming to the church, whatever that is, especially the regional churches, and trying to figure out, well, how do we actually get them to broadcast so they can actually broadcast to a wider audience, but also fulfill their congregation. And, I think the important thing with the technology today is it really isn't that hard. That pastors who haven't touched this before, there's really simple ways of doing it. We're all getting accustomed to Zoom now and the methods that we're using there, but understand it's not really that hard. And the great thing is you can build it in segments. You can start with one camera, you can have one tripod, you can do a really great shot every single week, and then once you get the handle of that, you move up to 2 or 3 cameras, and obviously, like yourself, Dominic, you can move to 6 or 2 studios, whatever you want to do. But I think you have to understand, or the pastors have to understand, you can do it incrementally, and you don't have to jump off the cliff and spend lots and lots of money to make this happen, which for a lot of pastors might just be the step too far.
Karl, you were talking about shot selection, and what are some of the positives and negatives of shot selection that you would be advising people?
There are things about
and switching between shots, and how to use that wisely. I mean, I just thought there's some wisdom I want to drill down on there.
Yeah, look, there are certain. I watched an episode of a show a few months ago, and Simon would have been dragging his hair out watching it, because that person would be talking in the interview, and then they would cut to something random, and you kind of go, why are we going there? So there are things like, if I'm speaking about an illustration and I'm giving the background to the illustration, I'm talking kind of lightly, and there's a wide. There's a wide. And then one of the skills is, and then I start to drill down to what's important, and you'll just notice that you often you slow down what you're saying. That's a 2-shot. And then I get to the really important point. That's the close-up. And don't cut away from the close-up till the point that you're making is finished. And then you might go back into explaining the next thing you're going to talk about. Bang, you're out in the wide again. So there it's like the intensity of what you say should impact the closeness of the shot. And so the more important things you say, the tighter you want to be. I mean, one of the things that the guys will often do in editing is actually, what do you call that thing, Simon, where you slowly draw in?
Zoom, is it?
Yeah, but it's...
No, Simon, what is the word?
Well, tracking.
Yeah, and you kind of...
Some people slowly zoom in, that's the other thing.
Yeah, which is this idea of you start at a 2, and as it gets more intense, you just... And the tracking in is actually imperceptible. But what you're doing is, as you're moving in, the person is getting drawn in. So there are those things. And look, an ounce of common sense with training from someone like Simon and his team, you don't have to be a genius to work it out, but there are sometimes, it's a bit like people who've got a new lighting desk. You ever had a new lighting desk, Jodie? And some kid who's 18 on the lighting desk during worship is playing with every kind of opportunity. You're like, no, we don't need swirling lights. Okay? Because you've got all the edit opportunities doesn't mean you should use them all the time.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of move between the style of what's going on and what you're saying and the emotional intensity of what you're saying needs to balance up with what the edit is, what camera selection is being used.
What about the rest of the service and shot use, Simon?
Yeah, look, if I can just follow on just quickly from Karl, why we use wide shots, mid shots and close-ups, it's actually a human reason, and part of that is as you gravitate towards somebody and you're interested in what they say, you kind of do this. You move in and you sit there and you'll naturally do that. I like to say at a dinner party, if somebody's interesting, you'll generally change your pose and lean in towards them. Certainly if you're falling in love with somebody, you see them in the distance and then you get closer and have a conversation and obviously come very close together at dinner and you have candlelight which lights up their eyes. They're all elements of the way that we actually tell stories and actually engage an audience in the area of film. To answer your question, it depends on the technology that you have. If you have one camera, you're pretty much going to stay in a mid shot for most of the service. If you've got two cameras, you can afford a wide shot, a mid shot, and you can go to a close-up, but you need to be able to edit those shots together. If you have three cameras, you can do all three. You can have a wide shot, a mid shot's kind of from your stomach up, and you can have the close-up here, and you have a mixing desk, which those mixing desks now are like $1,000. They're not crazily priced like they were in the past. You can actually have that person choose between those shots. It really comes down to, as Karl was saying, the skills base, because if you tell a joke on a wide shot, it may not be funny. That if you had told it on a mid or a close up because you needed to see the delivery, it's those kind of elements that take a little bit of time to actually get used to.
And my addition to that, Simon, is don't be chopping and chasing too often. Like you need to kind of linger on shots for a reasonable length of time. Bouncing between three cameras because you can is not a wise thing to do, because it's just distracting. People are like, where are we going? Why are we going there? But if it can be subtly worked in with what's going on the platform, what's being said, the emotional intensity, you're drawing people in. That's the piece that you want people to make those choices on.
Jodie?
I'm going to feel like I'm sitting in on a masterclass here. This is great. I'm taking notes. It's great. At our little church, we started literally with my iPhone sitting on a music stand. That was week 1 and week 2. And then we got a camera and then we plugged in a few. And it's been this sort of evolution of a little church setting up a studio. For some of my mates who are pastors, it's been a challenge, and I'll get a call about once a week saying, what do I do? And just I point them in a few directions and so on and say a few things. But I think it's important to know that you can do an awful lot with so little. And my advice to people generally has been, if you can, go live, go simple, but go live.
Yeah. And I guess I'm not sure what choice you made, but I think Simon's point there, even if you've got one camera, don't be the whole platform, because people do want to. They want to be able to see your facial expression. So that's the piece that's kind of helpful. The tricky thing is, if you haven't done it much, for you, Jodie, is it's really awkward. It just feels awkward but once you get used to it, that's the bit. If you've got one camera, I reckon you're head and shoulders.
The thing we haven't talked about, which in a sense is the most important thing of all, is audio. Yeah. Why is audio the most important thing of all, Karl?
Oh, because simply, as a good friend that I worked with for many years will say, people who put up with bad pictures, they won't put up with bad audio. If you can't hear, it's really, somebody kind of might say, I prefer a wider shot than that. But if they can't hear it, that's really, really bad, essentially. So, a bit of light on people's faces, but work on the audio. And which is the other thing, you would have got your own mic on you. You know, if you have an audio, which is the whole room, like, you know, some of these cameras are great, but they just pick up everything. And you sound like you're in a kind of empty box. It's a horrible sound. So you need your voice to be a bit warm. So again, there's very cheap options on that. It's not expensive, but get a warm voice.
Simon?
Bad audio makes it look even worse.
And one of the things we've discovered is you actually have to have well, not you have to, but it's advantageous to have a different sound mix for the live stream to the in the room. And for us, it's got to do with the volume of the drums and things like. It's not so much the spoken voice; it can be the same mix for the spoken voice, but for the whole music experience, which has actually meant a significant upskilling in our sound mixing people's gifts over the last little while.
Yeah. I mean, and that's very true of lots of live events. You know, they have different mixes. Front of house mix to the recorded mix are actually totally different mixes, and that's because the experience is very different. Don't ask me how they do it. I just know they do.
What have you done on that? Sorry, Simon?
It's so literally inexpensive to get good sound. You know, you could spend $250 and have a little, the size of half a cigarette box that clips onto your lapel and will broadcast directly to your camera. And all these kind of things are out now. So, you know, pastors can really, if they engage in this, it'll broaden the reach of their church. That's what's so exciting. And it's, you know, what we effectively call digital ministry.
And keep in mind that if there's anybody that knows about technology, Simon Hunter is the man.
Jodie, what's been your audio experience?
Well, we started off, originally I got a little mic that I plugged into the side of my iPhone, and I had the iPhone right there. I could actually touch it, so it was picking me up, and that was quite good. But then as we evolved, we eventually, the church bought a new digital mixer because we'd been planning to before COVID, and it was like, well, we really need it now. And so I've learned most tricks in the book about how to make it sound a little bit better. But it's a little bit of an art, and there's a bit of art and science in there. But having all the instruments go into the desk and then have this little sub mix and things, that has certainly helped.
Have you got young guys that have wanted to get involved in that?
Yeah, we've got a few.
Because it is a bit. I mean, it is a kind of, you know, running a church service is not very tricky, but doing a digital kind of program is something that some of the younger guys that are coming through who are great at all this stuff. You know, so giving them that opportunity is a good thing.
Once upon a time, having had a background in radio, I was the most gifted sound mixer in the church, but those days are long gone.
Great news.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, thanks so much for coming and talking to us today. My guests on The Pastor's Heart, Simon Hunter on the thing from Queensland, and Karl Fasse and Jodie McNeil. You've been with us on The Pastor's Heart, and we'll look forward to your company next week.